Reports of anti-Semitic incidents in the US and Europe have reached a record high since last year's Hamas attack in Israel, with the Netherlands still reeling from the unrest that erupted on the 7th of November when Israeli football fans came under attack in the center of Amsterdam. This week, in fact on the 28th of November, thousands gathered in this very city protesting against anti-Semitism under the banner of Together Against Jew Hatred. Joining me now is Professor of International Relations, Susana Mangana, specializing in migrations and cultural diversity of Deusto University, Bilbao, Spain. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Okan. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience.
Thank you very much. In the light of the case of the Netherlands and beyond, are we genuinely observing the surge of anti-Semitism in Europe? Or do you think that we are sort of exaggerating the scope of the problem?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that the term anti-Semitic and anti-Semitism is being used in order to disregard any critique against the Israeli war on Gaza. That is to say that anti-Semitism still exists in the Western world, especially in Europe, but it is the same as saying that Europe is also racist. So I think I agree with historians like Ilan Pappé, the author of The Ethnic Cleansing in Palestine, who says that the Israeli government, since October the 7th last year, has been weaponizing. Israel has been using accusations of anti-Semitism in order to disregard any critique against his offensive in Gaza, which is a war on the Palestinians. So I think we have to be extremely careful, Okan, when it comes to using this term and this adjective, because in fact, it is counterproductive because it conflates with the real efforts being exerted in order to fight against real anti-Semitism.
And talking about real anti-Semitism, how would you define it?
Well, I think anti-Semitism is any hostility sentiment or harboring any hostility against the Jews for the simple fact of them being Jewish. So I think what we have to talk about is not anti-Semitism anymore, but talk about racism. And of course, all societies suffer from this prejudiced attitude or sentiment, which is racist. I mean, like judging other people or going against them simply because of their color of skin or because of their ethnicity is totally wrong and immoral in 21st century. But even Israel is also racist. So we have to be careful because many countries now and many even scholars and writers or even journalists don't want to call Israel a genocidal state because they are afraid of being accused of being anti-Semitic. So this is totally wrong because it goes against an open dialogue and freedom of expression. And I think in times when we are bombarded with a heavy load of information in social media like X, former Twitter, or Instagram or TikTok, we need to be able to have that open and honest dialogue because a lot of people receive information they cannot digest, they cannot understand the roots of the conflict. So over-abusing the term anti-Semitic and anti-Semitism pays a very poor service to those fighting against anti-Semitism, which is real and it exists.
And what happened on the 7th of November when Israeli fans, football supporters, were attacked? Would that go under the rubric of anti-Semitism, or it is something that you would regard a separate development which could be classified as racism but not necessarily anti-Semitism? Because that was the key point upon which I built my initial question. I'm sure you know what happened. Yeah.
Yes, of course we know, but the question, I think, I understand your point, but you have to understand that the people reacted against these hooligans who were very fanatic, they were very vicious, they were very wild, and they were ripping off Palestinian flags from people's own property, private property. I mean, they were climbing to their flats and dragging those, taking those Palestinian flags from their balcony, which is private property, and also they were shouting, you know, like death to the Arabs and other insults, which I don't want to repeat here in front of your audience, but we can all imagine them starting with the F letter. So I think we cannot just say people went after them for no reason. I mean, people were very upset because these Israeli hooligans, they were provocative in extreme. And that is also something that we have to condemn. So it's not about pogroms, it's not about being anti-Semitic, it is about saying, don't over-abuse the term. We have to be able to criticize the current war on Gaza. We have to be able to criticize any government for that matter. Otherwise, what kind of democracy are we defending? And that's an interesting subject we'll have to discuss, Okan. There has been a shifting trend in far-right parties in Europe. The main allies for Israel today in the European Parliament are paradoxically are far-right parties, especially the Spanish far-right, extreme far-right party, Vox, V-O-X. So, I mean, these parties simply align with Israel because of their common and their shared interest in pursuing Islamophobia sentiments, because they are against the immigration of Muslims into Europe. As you may know, the majority of immigrants arriving to Europe come from Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries. So this is the real reason why they are allying with Israel, when in fact these far-right ideologies, till the very recent past, they were very capable, and they were guilty of spreading conspiracy ideas, and they were seen and portraying Jews as the real threat to their national and ethnic superiority, the white supremacy in Europe. So this is something we have to be very cautious, that propaganda is working for the Israeli government, and this current government presided by Benjamin Netanyahu, they are weaponizing the term anti-Semitism, and they are driving people, even scholars, even colleagues, who are also falling into self-censorship because they don't want to risk being faced with legal trouble or perhaps being questioned in their university, at their jobs, So this is very bad for democracy and for freedom of speech.
Thank you very much, Professor. On the basis of what you have said so far, I'm sure you will disagree with this headline coming from Times of Israel. The Times of Israel recently wrote that once a tolerant haven, Netherlands now is seeing anti-Semitism surge as Jews across Europe are feeling the element of danger, and they are reflecting on the post-October the 7th reality. I mean, on the basis of what you said, I think your answer is going to be very, very clear. But if you look at this subject in its wider contours, about any form of racism, not just against Jews or Muslims, how would you evaluate the rise of far-right policies and politicians in today's Europe and the immigration issues? We all understand that these two issues are interconnected, but do you think that the element of interconnection between them will continue to be augmented, or you will see this subject being sort of removed from European political landscape at some point soon? What is the longevity of duration of this subject as a vital element of political deliberations in Europe, you think?
Well, right now in Europe, we are seeing a very divided and very divisive European Union, with countries like Poland and Hungary totally different policies towards the policies being carried out by the Spanish government or even the French government. I mean, those countries in Europe that, like Spain and Italy and France, who are receiving the majority of immigrants, are the ones working really hard to see how they can continue receiving migrants, trying to adapt to the new reality that these people will come from Africa, from Muslim majority countries. But at the same time, there is a lot of pressure from these far-right politicians who really want to be restrictive. They want to be very combative. They want to combat illegal immigration, when in fact in Europe, we need extra hands, we need extra people, because the birth rate in many countries has dropped very, very low, especially in Spain or even in Italy. So again, I think people don't grasp the problem completely. I mean, they cannot understand fully the roots of all these conflicts. So again, linking this question with the first one you said, I think we shouldn't fall into the trap being displayed by the Israeli government, trying to accuse the Netherlands and other countries in Europe of being excessively or exaggerating anti-Semitism. That's not the case. What we are opposing here in Europe right now is continuing with a war that has already killed over 44,000 people, civilians, most of them women and children. So what we're opposing here is for Israel to grab more land, which is a total injustice against the Palestinians who didn't create the Holocaust in Germany. And Germany is too worried about accepting with total impunity whatever this government in Israel decides to do, because they're paying their price, they're paying for their sin during the Second World War and the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust. But again, we shouldn't confuse the terms and we shouldn't lead people into confusion. I mean, we have to stand all united against racism, and within racism, we can talk about anti-Semitism, but we shouldn't make or establish any hierarchy, because people today are saying, oh, it's wrong to be against the black people simply because they're black, but it's even worse to be against the Jews. Well, that's totally immoral. You should be, cautious of not being against any person, not only because he is a different color of your skin, or because he comes from a different, lower economic background, or because he comes from a Muslim majority country. So I think enough is enough. And in Europe, we don't want to buy all these lies and this propaganda coming from the Israeli government and also from some media outlets that are being paid by Israel in order to spread these lies, because this is a total lie, and it's a lie since the minute that professional and serious newspapers like AnewZ, or even professionals from journalism, I'm sure you know Gideon Levy is a very serious Israeli journalist. He says, we are spreading false ideas. There is no anti-Semitism, not more anti-Semitism today in Europe than 5 or 10 years ago. So I think what we are seeing in Europe today is people are fed up with this war. They are very, they feel despair when they see these images from this genocide being committed to the Palestinian people. And it's not me saying this. This is the International Court at The Hague has already sanctioned Prime Minister Netanyahu and his former Minister of Defense, as well as Mohammed Deif, the leader of the Islamic militia Hamas. They've been sanctioned as people who have committed, leaders who have committed war crimes. So it's not just us saying this. And if you read the definition at the UN for genocide, it's very clear that Israel from day one, from October 8th, has been carried out. They've been carrying a war against Palestinian identity, Palestinian even memory, destroying hospitals, destroying universities, destroying schools, driving the Palestinians into the frontiers, into the borders of Egypt, and making life unbearable so that most of them will want to leave, or that those remaining will be crippled for life. So this is something that we're saying in Europe, enough is enough. Don't tell us that this is not a genocide. Don't lie to us. We are not anti-Semitic, we're not anti-Jews, we're anti-Zionist, which is a totally different term.
Yeah, we've come to an essential point about distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Thank you very much, Professor Mangana. I'm so grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for this interview. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure. This was Professor Susana Mangana from the Uster University. Now joining me is Marcos Perestrello, Vice President of the Assembly of the Republic, the Parliament of Portugal. Mr. Perestrello, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Hello, Horkan. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. What is your take on the view that anti-Semitic incidents have been on the rise in Europe since October the 7th of last year? Many reports suggest that a post-October the 7th reality has made the continent's Jews question their futures, and they no longer see Israel as their insurance policy. I earlier spoke to Professor Mangana of the Uster University. She takes a dim view of this proposition, saying that we shouldn't fall into the trap of equating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. What would be your view on the subject?
Well, all kinds of discrimination and repression are absolutely unacceptable on democracies like the ones that are the majority of the countries in Europe. And that is true for anti-Semitism, and it's also true for other kinds of discrimination. And they all must be strongly repressed by the democratic authorities. what you say about the rising of anti-Semitism after the 7th October, we can see it on the streets. We need to emphasize that it is a minority of the population. You cannot judge the European people for the expression of violence of small minorities of the population that are highly repressed, both by the authorities and by the clear majority of the population. What we need to emphasize in a democratic country, in democratic countries, in democratic continents like Europe, is the absolute need to respect everybody, to respect every minorities, because that is a huge difference between a democratic country, a prosperous country, and also autocracies that we find all over the world. And we cannot be like autocracies that do not defend the rights of the minorities that live in both countries. That is that the way how we treat minorities marks a big difference between a developed country, democratic country, and others less developed, and with non-democratic regimes.
In the light of these allegations and claims and reports that anti-Semitism has been on the rise in Europe since October the 7th, you said that it does apply to only a minority, the very small proportion of the European population, but we also have seen some elements of Islamophobia as well. In retrospect, bearing in mind the European ideals and the current state of affairs in Europe, in particular bearing in mind the rise of far-right politicians, do you think that this construct known as unity and diversity is now facing one of its greatest challenges ever?
It's a huge challenge. A challenge that rises inside the continent, but there's a lot of malign influence from the outside. And one of the most relevant preoccupations that democracies in Europe need to have is precisely to find ways of increasing the democratic resilience to malign interference from the outside, namely through social media, that are used to amplify the problems that exist, but the way how social media are worked by malign interference from the outside and from other powers that are interested in the destabilization of the continent needs to be a central preoccupation of the democratic governments. So I would say that, yes, that's the center, or that should be in the center of the preoccupations of the democratic governments.
And when you said malign influence from outside, did you have any particular geopolitical center in mind?
I'm thinking about China, I'm thinking about North Korea, I'm thinking about Iran, I'm thinking about Russia, I'm thinking about proxies of those countries that interfere in the social media of the democratic countries, taking profit of the liberty that we live in, and it provokes lots of instability inside our countries, amplifying some of the problems that exist, but sometimes are not so big, so huge as they seem when you look only at the at social media.
Mr. Pestrel, I'm so grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Earlier this week, Pakistani authorities launched a sweeping operation to disperse supporters of imprisoned former Prime Minister Imran Khan. The standoff between the government forces and the protesters escalated into violent clashes. Hera Mustafa reports from Islamabad, Pakistan.
Authorities in Pakistan plan to raise an anti-riot force to tackle future public demonstrations and sit-ins in the capital, Islamabad. This announcement comes after this week's public rally held in the city by the jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan's party to demand his release. This move is being criticized by the party leadership of the imprisoned former Prime Minister Khan, calling it an attack on the freedom of expression and speech. In the violent clashes in the past few days, several people died, including security personnel in the heart of Islamabad. Khan's party, PTI, claims that scores of protesters were killed by live gunfire aimed at its supporters, something which the government denies. Human rights organizations condemn the government over claims it is restricting media reporting over the number of casualties among PTI protesters, and are urging the authorities to hold a thorough and transparent investigation. Imran Khan has been in jail since last year over multiple corruption charges and accuses the country's powerful military for orchestrating his removal by colluding with his political rivals. That's a charge the army denies. Political experts warn that the ongoing political instability in Pakistan, which has persisted for the past few months, could escalate into widespread civil unrest at a time of economic crisis for the country. Hera Mustafa, AnewZ, Islamabad.
That's all for now. See you very soon.